Hey folks, I just caught 6 strangers trespassing on my family ranch, and they were building a fence across my property. Just imagine sipping your morning coffee while watching the sunrise over your ancestral land, and suddenly, hitting-ting, the sound of hammers hitting posts rings out like a death knell for your peace and quiet. By the way, where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below, because this story is about to show you what happens when small power meets real authority. That morning started like any other at Sunshine Ranch. The property had been in my family for over 100 years, passed down through generations of Reynolds farmers. As a third-generation farmer and a widower raising my teenage daughter Emily, the ranch wasn't just my livelihood, it was my legacy. The early April air felt crisp as I sat on my porch, coffee mug warming my hands, watching the sun climb over the eastern fields. But the previous night's rain left everything smelling fresh and earthy. It was the kind of morning that reminded me why I'd left my city job as a real estate attorney and returned to my roots after my wife passed away 5 years ago. What I didn't expect was for that peaceful moment to be shattered by the sound of heavy machinery starting up somewhere near my property line. At first I thought it might be road work on the county access road, but the noise was coming from the west side of my property, where the new Oak Ridge Estates development bordered my land. That fancy subdivision had been creeping closer to my ranch for the past few years, with their manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses slowly replacing the farms and woodland that once surrounded Sunshine Ranch. I set my coffee down with a sigh and headed out to investigate, following the sound of voices and equipment across my grazing pasture. As I crested the small hill that marked the traditional boundary between my land and what was now Oak Ridge Estates, I stopped dead in my tracks. A crew of 6 men in matching uniforms were methodically installing metal fence posts in a straight line through my western pasture. Their truck, emblazoned with Oak Ridge Estates HOA on the side, was parked nearby with stacks of glossy metal fencing materials. I approached calmly, my boots squelching in the still damp grass. I might have been a country farmer now, but my years as an attorney had taught me that starting with accusations rarely led to productive conversations. "Morning, gentlemen. Mind if I ask what you're working on here?" I called out as I approached. The workers paused, and a stocky man with a clipboard stepped forward, apparently the foreman. "Morning, sir. We're installing the new property line fence for Oak Ridge Estates. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon." His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was simply stating the obvious. I kept my expression neutral, even as alarm bells rang in my head. "Interesting. Thing is, you're about 100 yards into my property. I'm Mike Reynolds. I own Sunshine Ranch." I extended my hand, which the foreman shook reluctantly. "Look, Mr. Reynolds, we're just following the work order. Oak Ridge Estates HOA contracted us to install this fence according to these specifications." He handed me his clipboard, which contained a work order and a survey map with a boundary line that indeed showed my property line significantly farther east than it had ever been. I studied it carefully, noting the survey was conducted by someone named Trevor Nichols, whose signature looked fresh at the bottom of the document. "This survey is incorrect. The property line hasn't changed in 100 years. I'm going to have to ask you to stop work until we get this sorted out." The foreman shook his head. "Can't do that, sir. We've been paid in advance and we have permits to complete this work. You'll need to take it up with the HOA management." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the fence posts, the workers, and their equipment. Several of the crew members shifted uncomfortably, but the foreman stood his ground. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said calmly. "This is trespassing and property damage." While waiting for Sheriff Jim to arrive, I continued documenting everything. I knew Jim Cooper from high school. We'd played football together before he joined the police academy, and I went to law school. When his patrol car pulled up 20 minutes later, I felt a small measure of relief, expecting him to shut this operation down immediately. But that relief was short-lived. After reviewing the documents and speaking with both me and the foreman, Jim rubbed his neck uncomfortably. "Mike, hate to say it, but this looks like a civil dispute. The crew has paperwork that shows they have permission to be here, even if that paperwork might be wrong. I can't stop them without a court order." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They're trespassing on my land, Jim." He shook his head. "I understand you're upset, but legally my hands are tied. They have documentation that conflicts with yours. You need to take this to court or resolve it with the HOA." Before I could argue further, we heard the sound of screeching tires as Emily's beat-up Jeep came flying down the dirt road toward us. My 17-year-old daughter had apparently spotted the commotion on her way back from school. Emily's Jeep skidded to a stop dangerously close to the half-built fence, and she jumped out, her dark ponytail bouncing with righteous teenage indignation. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, stomping toward us with her phone already out and recording. "They're building a fence on our property," I explained quickly, trying to keep my voice level to prevent her from escalating the situation. Emily's eyes narrowed as she panned her camera across the scene. "Under what authority? This is private property." One of the younger workers muttered something about entitled farmers, which I pretended not to hear, but Emily definitely caught. She stepped toward him, but I gently caught her arm. "We're handling this legally, Em. Go back to the house." She reluctantly backed down, but not before capturing close-up images of every worker's face and their vehicle license plates. After they left, I stood staring at the metal posts jutting from my soil like alien invaders. I could fight this with brute force, tear out the posts, confront the HOA with a shotgun like my grandfather might have done, but that wasn't my way. I'd spent too many years practicing law to throw it all away on an impulse. No. If the HOA wanted to play games with property lines and permits, I'd play too, but by my rules. I'd noticed the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo on their uniforms and truck. Well, if they wanted to dance, I'd show them the steps, and the first rule in this dance was, never let your opponent know what cards you're holding. The next morning, I drove into town early, dressed in what Emily called my city clothes. Dark jeans and a button-down shirt instead of my usual work flannel and boots. Oak Ridge Estates looked exactly like what it was, a planned community that had been stamped onto former farmland with little regard for the natural contours of the landscape. The houses were large and imposing, with perfectly manicured lawns and not a single personalized touch to be found. At the center of the development stood a two-story building marked Community Center and HOA offices, all glass and stone in a style that seemed to be trying too hard to look rustic while simultaneously rejecting everything actually rustic about our county. I parked my truck, mud-splattered from the previous day's rain, between two gleaming SUVs and headed inside. The interior was all sleek surfaces and tasteful abstract art, with a reception desk that looked more appropriate for a Manhattan law firm than a rural homeowners association. Behind the desk sat a thin, nervous-looking woman who eyed my boots with thinly veiled disdain. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates. How may I help you?" Her nameplate read Linda Hoffman, Administrative Assistant. I put on my most polite smile, the one I used to use in court when opposing counsel had said something particularly ridiculous. "Good morning, Linda. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the HOA, please. It's regarding a property line dispute." Linda's fingers tapped rapidly on her keyboard before she looked up with a practiced smile. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Reynolds? Michael Reynolds. And no, I don't have an appointment, but this is rather urgent. Your association is currently building a fence on my property without proper authorization." Her smile didn't waver, though her eyes flicked nervously to a closed door behind her. "I'm afraid Ms. Westfield is in meetings all morning and doesn't take walk-ins. I'd be happy to schedule you for next week." I leaned slightly on her desk, keeping my expression pleasant but firm. "I'll wait. Please let Ms. Westfield know I'm here regarding the unauthorized construction on Sunshine Ranch property. I'm sure she'll want to address this immediately to avoid further legal complications." Linda's smile faltered, but she nodded and picked up her phone. After a hushed conversation, she informed me that Miss Westfield would have a few minutes for me after her current meeting. I settled into one of the uncomfortable modern chairs in the waiting area, pulling out a small notebook where I began documenting observations about the office. Over the next hour, I watched as various residents came in with complaints about neighbors' holiday decorations still up in April, unapproved mailbox colors, and one particularly heated discussion about the proper height for garden gnomes. The HOA's reach into people's lives seemed both comical and disturbing. Finally, a door opened and a stream of well-dressed men and women emerged, followed by a commanding presence. Karen Westfield looked exactly like someone who would run an HOA with an iron fist. Impeccably styled blonde hair, a tailored navy pantsuit, and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She scanned the waiting area, her gaze landing on me with a flash of annoyance before she composed herself. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand you have concerns about our community improvement project. I can spare 5 minutes." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked back into her office, clearly expecting me to follow. The power move was so transparent it was almost amusing. Karen's office was a shrine to herself. Walls lined with framed certificates, photographs of her shaking hands with various officials, and an oversized desk designed to make visitors feel small. I took a seat across from her without being invited, matching her power play with one of my own. "Ms. Westfield, your HOA is currently installing a fence on my property without permission. I'd like to understand the basis for this action." Karen's smile tightened as she pulled a folder from her desk. Mr. Reynolds, according to our recent survey, the fence is being installed on Oak Ridge Estates property. The previous understanding of the boundary was incorrect. She slid a document across the desk. The same survey I'd seen yesterday, showing the property line cutting a significant chunk out of my western pasture. This survey contradicts county records, historical documentation, and the original property deeds, I replied evenly. I'd like to see the building permits and HOA board decision authorizing this construction. Karen's perfectly manicured nails tapped once on her desk before she leaned back in her chair. Our actions are entirely within our rights, Mr. Reynolds. This is an internal community improvement project that doesn't require your approval. The survey speaks for itself. I kept my expression neutral despite my rising irritation. I'm afraid I can't accept that answer. If the fence isn't removed from my property within 48 hours, I'll be forced to take legal action for trespassing and property damage. Karen's smile turned cold. Mr. Reynolds, let me be frank. Oak Ridge Estates represents progress and increased property values for this entire county. Your quaint little farm is frankly an eyesore that's holding back development. We are willing to be reasonable, but don't test my patience with baseless threats. Before I could respond, our conversation was interrupted by a portly older man who knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. Karen, did we finalize the agenda for the— Oh, I didn't realize you had a visitor. The man's expensive golf attire and Rolex screamed retired executive, and Karen's expression shifted to one of barely concealed annoyance. Richard, this is Mr. Reynolds from the neighboring farm. Richard Stevens is on our HOA board, she added for my benefit, though her tone suggested the introduction was a formality she'd rather skip. Richard's face lit up with recognition. Reynolds, from that ranch west of us? Glad you're here. You should see the plans for what we're doing with that strip of land. The new community pool and tennis courts are going to increase all our property values by at least 15%. Karen's sharp glare silenced him immediately, but the damage was already done. Community pool? I asked innocently. I wasn't aware the HOA was planning recreational facilities on my property. Richard looked confused, glancing between Karen and me. But the survey shows it's— Richard, Karen cut him off. Why don't you email me those agenda items later? After Richard beat a hasty retreat, Karen stood, signaling our meeting was over. Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you consult with your own surveyor if you have concerns. Oak Ridge Estates is proceeding with our planned improvements. Good day. I stood, slowly, placing my business card on her desk. A simple white card with just my name and phone number, no title or affiliation. I expect your call within 24 hours, Miss Westfield, if you'd like to resolve this amicably. As I walked out through the reception area, I distinctly heard Karen say to Linda, find out everything you can about this farmer. We'll show him what law means in Oak Ridge. Little did she know, I didn't just understand the law, I helped create it in this county. The law offices of Wilson & Associates occupied the upper floor of what had once been the town's general store. A brick building dating back to the 1920s that had been carefully preserved even as the businesses within changed over the decades. Sam Wilson, the sole associate in his own firm's name, had been my classmate in law school before choosing to return to our hometown rather than chase big firm prestige. His office was everything the HOA building wasn't. Worn leather chairs, bookshelves stuffed with actual law books rather than decorative objects, and a window view of the town square with its century-old oak trees. He looked up from his computer as I entered, pushing his reading glasses up onto his forehead. Mike Reynolds! Don't often see you in town 2 days in a row. He stood to shake my hand, then gestured to the chair across from his cluttered desk. I settled in and explained the situation with the HOA, watching Sam's expression grow increasingly troubled. They actually started building without permits? That's bold, even for Oak Ridge, he muttered, turning to his computer to access the county records database. Let me pull up your original property documents. For the next hour, we pored over the historical records of Sunshine Ranch's boundaries, from the original land grant to my grandfather's purchase of additional acreage in the 1950s. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The HOA's survey was wrong, deliberately or otherwise. The boundary is clear in every historical document, Sam concluded, printing several pages for me. There's no legal basis for their claim, but Karen Westfield has been throwing her weight around ever since that development went in. She's got connections with some of the county commissioners. Campaign donations speak loudly, unfortunately. I nodded, already forming a plan. I need to know everything about this Trevor Nichols who did their survey. Can you help with that? Sam grinned, cracking his knuckles before typing rapidly. Public records search is my specialty. Let's see who Mr. Nichols is. While Sam worked, I stepped out to call Emily, who answered on the first ring. Dad, I've been researching that surveyor guy. My daughter's enthusiasm for investigation never ceased to amaze me. She'd make a terrifying prosecutor someday. Trevor Nichols has had his surveyor's license revoked in both Nevada and Arizona for falsifying boundary data. I found court records online. He's only been in our state for 8 months. I smiled despite the situation. Good work, Em. I'm with Sam now. We'll add that to what we're finding. How's everything at the ranch? Her voice darkened. They're still working on that fence. I've been documenting everything and keeping an eye on them from a distance, like you said. But Dad, they're moving fast. The posts are all in, and they started attaching the panels this morning. After promising Emily I'd be home soon, I rejoined Sam, who had compiled a troubling profile of Trevor Nichols. Not only had he lost his license in 2 states, but he'd only received provisional approval to practice in our state, approval that specifically required supervision by a fully licensed surveyor for all official surveys. There's no co-signature on the HOA survey, Sam noted, pointing to the document, which makes it invalid for any legal purpose, including property disputes or construction permits. We next visited the county recorder's office, confirming no boundary changes had ever been officially registered for my property. The clerk, a former client of mine, also revealed that the HOA had submitted building permit applications for the fence just yesterday, meaning they had started construction before even applying for permits. By late afternoon, I was hungry and frustrated. I stopped by Rosa's Market on Main Street, both for a sandwich and because Rosa Martinez was the unofficial information hub of the entire county. Her small grocery had been serving the community for decades, and Rosa knew everything about everyone. The bell above the door jangled as I entered, and Rosa looked up from where she was restocking tomatoes, her face breaking into a wide smile. Michael Reynolds. Twice in 1 week. What brings my favorite farmer to town again? I explained the situation while she made me a sandwich, her expression growing darker with each detail. That Karen woman, she huffed, slicing the sandwich with more force than necessary. She's been causing trouble all over. Did you know the Johnsons sold their orchard to the HOA for half its value after suddenly getting fined thousands of dollars for violations? And the Miller's farm next to the east entrance? Same thing. They got buried in paperwork and threats until they gave up. As I ate, Rosa lowered her voice conspiratorially. My nephew works at the county planning office. He told me Oak Ridge submitted plans for a resort hotel and conference center, but they need more land to meet the minimum acreage requirements. They've been quietly buying up all the small farms around them, piece by piece. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about a fence or property lines. It was about forcing me out so they could acquire my land. One more thing, Rosa added, leaning closer. That Trevor man who did their survey, he comes in here sometimes, always bragging about his connections. Last week, he was drinking beer in the back with some resort company executives, talking about how they're going to transform this backwater town. After leaving Rosa's, I spotted Sheriff Jim's patrol car parked outside the coffee shop and decided to make one more stop. Jim looked up guiltily from his apple pie as I slid into the booth across from him. Mike, about yesterday. I waved off his apology. I understand you were doing your job, Jim, but I need your honest assessment of something. I laid out what I'd learned about the HOA's tactics, Trevor's questionable credentials, and the apparent resort development plans. Jim listened intently, his fork forgotten beside his plate. When I finished, he sighed heavily. I can't officially take sides in a civil dispute, Mike. But off the record, Karen's got the mayor's ear and donations flowing to half the county commissioners. Tread carefully, he hesitated, then added in a lower voice. But if you found evidence of actual fraud or criminal activity, that would be a different matter entirely. It was time to use my position, but strategically. As the County Land Commissioner, a role I'd taken on 3 years ago when the previous commissioner retired, I had access to all land records, permit applications, and development plans submitted to the county. I rarely used my official authority in personal matters, preferring to keep my farming life separate from my governmental responsibility, but the HOA had crossed a line, and not just with me. If Rosa's information was correct, they were systematically pressuring small landowners throughout the area, using questionable tactics to assemble land for commercial development, potentially violating zoning laws, permit requirements, and ethical boundaries. Back in my truck, I made a call to the county clerk's office, requesting copies of all recent building permits submitted by Oak Ridge Estates HOA. As County Land Commissioner, such requests were routine, requiring no explanation. What I discovered sent a surge of both anger and satisfaction through me. The HOA had indeed submitted a permit application for the fence yesterday, but it was still pending review. They were building without approved permits, a clear violation of county regulations. I had them. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Reynolds, we know what you're doing. Stop now if you don't want trouble." They were trying to intimidate me? Interesting. I wondered if they knew that threatening a county commissioner was a high-level criminal offense in our state. I awoke the next morning to Emily shaking my shoulder urgently. Dad, wake up. They finished the fence overnight." I blinked groggily at my bedside clock, 5:43 a.m., before her words sank in. Throwing on clothes, I followed her outside to see that the HOA had indeed completed the fence during the night, presumably bringing in extra crews to work in darkness. The gleaming metal barrier now cut a sharp line through my western pasture, the morning sun reflecting off its surface in a way that seemed deliberately mocking. "I heard them around midnight," Emily explained as we stood surveying the damage. "By the time I got dressed and came out with the flashlight, they had a whole crew working under portable lights. They must have rushed to finish before we could get a court order." The fence was well constructed, I had to admit. 8 feet tall with no footholds, topped with decorative but sharp-looking finials. A gate had been installed where my tractor path ran, complete with a heavy padlock to which, naturally, we had no key. On the other side, workers were already spreading fresh sod and planting shrubs along the base of the fence, creating the impression of a long-established boundary. One silver-haired woman in HOA-branded attire was directing the landscapers while taking photos with her phone. When she noticed us watching, she pointedly turned her back. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice tight with frustration. I put my arm around her shoulders. "Now we document everything, then go to court. They've made a critical error by completing unauthorized construction." We spent the next hour photographing the fence from every angle, measuring its precise location relative to known survey markers, and recording video evidence. By 9 a.m., Sam was calling with disturbing news. "Mike, there's an article in the local paper about the boundary clarification between Oak Ridge Estates and Sunshine Ranch. They held a mini press conference yesterday afternoon." I pulled up the article on my phone, reading with increasing disbelief as Karen Westfield was quoted claiming the fence was necessary to protect our residents from agricultural pollutants and enhance property values throughout the county. The day got worse from there. By noon, I'd received an official-looking envelope containing a notice of violations from the HOA, listing dubious claims about my farm creating excessive noise, odors, and visual blight. The notice demanded immediate cessation of all nuisance activities within 100 yards of the new fence, effectively telling me I couldn't farm on my own land. I was still fuming over this when Emily called from the house. "Dad, Trevor Nichols is here with some people calling themselves environmental inspectors. They want to access our property." I hurried back to find Trevor and 3 other individuals in HOA windbreakers standing at my front gate, clipboards in hand. "Mr. Reynolds," Trevor began with false cordiality, "we're conducting a standard environmental assessment of properties adjacent to Oak Ridge Estates. We need access to your water sources and livestock areas." His fake professional tone couldn't hide the smug satisfaction in his eyes. Emily, bless her, was already recording the entire interaction on her phone. "Do you have a warrant or any legal authorization to enter private property?" I asked calmly. Trevor's smile faltered. "This is a routine inspection authorized by county environmental protocols." "No such protocols exist," I interrupted. "As a private landowner, I do not consent to your entry. If you have legitimate environmental concerns, file them through proper channels with actual government authorities, not a homeowners association playing pretend." Trevor's face reddened. "We have evidence of contamination originating from your property." "Then provide that evidence to the EPA or state environmental agencies," I cut him off again. "Now please leave my property before I report you for attempted trespassing." They retreated to their vehicles, but Trevor turned back with a parting shot. "The HOA board meets tomorrow to discuss further actions regarding your non-compliance. I suggest you reconsider your position." After they left, Emily showed me social media posts appearing in local community groups, obviously fake accounts posting supposed eyewitness reports of unsafe conditions at Sunshine Ranch, complete with misleading or outright fabricated photos. Some appeared to be stock photos of industrial farms with our ranch's name photoshopped onto signs. The campaign was having an effect. By evening, 3 regular customers had canceled their weekly produce orders, citing concerns about farming practices. The local farmers market coordinator called, nervously asking if we could take a week off while they sorted through some complaints. The coordinated attack was impressive in its thoroughness. They were attempting to damage not just my property, but my reputation and livelihood. That night, I received a formal notice that Oak Ridge Estates HOA had filed a lawsuit against me for encroachment on their property and requested an emergency injunction to halt all agricultural activities within 500 feet of the new fence, which would effectively shut down half my operation. Sam came over to review the lawsuit, shaking his head in disbelief at the audacity of their claims. "They're really pushing this fabricated survey as fact," he muttered, flipping through the filing. "But they've made a critical mistake, Mike. They've signed a legal document containing demonstrably false information about land boundaries. This goes beyond civil dispute into potential fraud." He looked up at me, eyes serious. "I think it's time you used your position officially. This isn't just about your property anymore. If they're doing this to you, the County Land Commissioner, imagine what they're doing to landowners without your resources and knowledge." As Sam handed me the lawsuit papers, I couldn't help but laugh. They actually signed a legal document with false information about land boundaries? Sam nodded, his eyes lighting up. "And you know what that means?" "It's time to let them know who they're really dealing with," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing the county commissioner's office. The HOA had declared war, but they had no idea who their enemy really was. The preliminary hearing for the HOA's injunction request was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the county courthouse. Instead of my usual farm clothes, I wore a charcoal suit that had been gathering dust in my closet since my days as a practicing attorney. Emily had insisted on coming along for moral support, dressed in what she called her future lawyer outfit, a blazer over a button-down shirt and dark jeans. We arrived early to find the small courtroom already filling with spectators. News of the dispute had spread throughout the community. Karen Westfield sat at the plaintiff's table with a slick-looking attorney and Richard Stevens, all three exuding confidence. Trevor Nichols sat directly behind them, nervously adjusting his tie. Judge Martha Hernandez, a no-nonsense jurist who'd been presiding over county matters for nearly 20 years, entered promptly at 9 a.m. After the preliminaries, Karen's attorney presented their case, painting me as an obstinate farmer refusing to acknowledge updated and professional survey results, while characterizing the HOA as community-minded citizens concerned about environmental impacts and property value. Trevor was called to testify about his survey methodology, presenting complicated-looking maps and technical jargon clearly designed to confuse rather than clarify. Throughout their presentation, I remained calm, taking notes and occasionally whispering to Sam, who represented me for this hearing. When our turn came, Sam stood. "Your Honor, before I present our defense, I should note that my client has a relevant disclosure to make regarding his standing in this matter." Judge Hernandez nodded, and I stood, buttoning my suit jacket. "Your Honor, while I am indeed the owner of Sunshine Ranch, I also serve as the County Land Commissioner, a position I've held for the past 3 years." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Karen's face went through a remarkable transformation from smugness to shock to barely contained fury. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel once for silence. "Mr. Reynolds, why is this relevant to the current proceedings?" "Your Honor, in my capacity as Land Commissioner, I have access to all official county land records, including the historical documents establishing the true boundary of my property. More importantly, I can confirm that the Oak Ridge Estates HOA commenced construction of the fence in question without approved permits, and that Mr. Trevor Nichols does not possess valid credentials to perform official surveys in this county." I approached the bench with a folder of documents. These are certified copies of the official county records, showing both the actual property boundaries and the status of the HOA's still pending permit applications. The judge reviewed the documents carefully before looking up at Trevor. "Mr. Nichols, do you hold a current, unrestricted surveyor's license in this state?" Trevor shifted uncomfortably. "I have a provisional license, Your Honor." Judge Hernandez's eyebrows rose. "A provisional license that requires supervision by a fully licensed surveyor for all official work, correct? Who supervised and co-signed this, sir?" Trevor glanced desperately at Karen, who was now furiously whispering to her attorney. "I worked independently on this project, Your Honor." The judge's expression hardened. "So this survey, which forms the basis of both the construction and this lawsuit, was performed without proper licensing and supervision as required by state law?" Karen's attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, even if there were procedural oversights in the survey process, the HOA acted in good faith based on the information available." Judge Hernandez cut him off with a raised hand. "Counselor, constructing a fence on disputed property without finalized permits is not acting in good faith. It appears your clients have engaged in unauthorized construction based on an invalid survey." She turned to me. "Commissioner Reynolds, what remedy are you seeking at this time?" I outlined my requests, immediate removal of the fence, restoration of my property to its original condition, and an injunction preventing the HOA from further encroachment. Karen looked like she might explode, her face flushed with anger. Judge Hernandez took only minutes to make her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, the court denies the HOA's request for injunction and instead orders Oak Ridge Estates to cease all construction activities and remove the existing fence within 72 hours. Furthermore, any future construction near the property line must be preceded by a properly conducted and officially registered survey. She fixed Karen with a stern look. The court takes a dim view of attempting to use invalid documentation in legal proceedings, Ms. Westfield. You're fortunate Commissioner Reynolds isn't pursuing sanctions at this time. With a final bang of her gavel, the hearing was adjourned. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, brushing past reporters who had gathered in the hallway. "This isn't over, Reynolds," she hissed as she passed me. "You may have your little government position, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. We won't let some dirt farmer stand in the way of progress." Richard hurried after her, looking considerably less confident than he had before the hearing. Trevor simply slunk away, avoiding eye contact with everyone. As Emily and I prepared to leave, my phone rang. It was Rosa, her voice urgent and concerned. "Mike, you need to get back to the ranch right away. Something's happening with your irrigation system. People are taking pictures. The water's running black." Emily and I raced back to Sunshine Ranch, arriving to find a small crowd gathered near the irrigation channel that ran along the western edge of our property, now separated from us by the HOA's fence. The water in the channel, which should have been clear, was indeed running black, with an oily sheen on the surface. Several people in Oak Ridge Estates clothing were documenting the scene with cameras and tablets, while others held handkerchiefs dramatically over their noses. Emergency vehicles were just arriving, responding to what had apparently been multiple calls about toxic pollution from my farm. I immediately called Sheriff Jim, who arrived minutes later. Together, we traced the discoloration upstream to a point where someone had dumped what appeared to be motor oil and some kind of black dye into the irrigation channel on the HOA side of the fence. "This is deliberate sabotage," Jim said, taking samples of the contaminated water. "The question is proving who did it." Emily, who had been questioning neighbors, came running up with news. "Mrs. Peterson across the street said she saw Linda's brother near the channel last night. He works as a maintenance guy for the HOA." This wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was a start. More troubling was the immediate impact. The contamination had reached some of my western fields, potentially damaging crops and requiring extensive soil testing. Richard Stevens wasted no time capitalizing on the situation. That evening, he hosted an emergency community meeting at the Oak Ridge Estates clubhouse, where he dramatically described the environmental disaster originating from Sunshine Ranch. Despite having no evidence, he claimed my farming practices had caused toxic runoff that threatened the entire development's water supply. Local news picked up the story, running alarming headlines about agricultural contamination concerns without waiting for environmental testing results. By nightfall, county environmental regulators had called to inform me they would be conducting mandatory inspections of my property the following day. The HOA's strategy was clear. If they couldn't take my land through boundary disputes, they would try to destroy my reputation and business, forcing me to sell through financial pressure. What they didn't count on was my daughter's technological savvy and determination. Late that night, Emily burst into my office, where I was reviewing environmental regulations to prepare for the next day's inspection. "Dad, I found something." She was practically vibrating with excitement. "Remember how Rose's Market has that security camera overlooking their back parking lot? It has a view of the corner of our property and the irrigation channel." She pulled up a video on her laptop showing grainy but recognizable footage of Trevor Nichols and another HOA employee approaching the irrigation channel at 2:13 a.m., carrying containers that they emptied into the water before quickly departing. "I knew it was sabotage," Emily exclaimed, practically bouncing in place. "We have them on video. This is actual criminal activity." I studied the footage carefully, making sure we could clearly identify Trevor. The quality wasn't perfect, but between his distinctive height and the Oak Ridge Estates logo visible on his jacket, it was unmistakably him. I immediately called Sheriff Jim, despite the late hour. "Jim, we have video evidence of Trevor Nichols contaminating our water supply. This goes beyond civil disputes. This is criminal vandalism and environmental crime." Jim's voice was grave when he responded. "Send me the footage now. I'll get a deputy out first thing in the morning to take statements, and we'll bring Trevor in for questioning." Before hanging up, Jim added something that made my stomach drop. "Mike, I should warn you, Karen called the mayor this afternoon after the hearing, and I heard they're trying to convene a special meeting of the county board to review your position as land commissioner. The implication was clear. Karen was attempting to neutralize my official authority by having me removed from office. They're playing hardball now, I told Emily after ending the call, but so can we. The next morning, environmental inspectors arrived at the ranch, decked out in full hazmat gear that seemed excessive for the situation. I cooperated fully, showing them our farming practices, organic certification records, and water management systems. Their initial findings supported what I'd been saying. The contamination had come from an external source, not from our agricultural activities. By noon, news had spread that Trevor Nichols had been brought in for questioning by the sheriff's department. By evening, he'd been formally arrested for criminal mischief, vandalism, and environmental violations. The local news, which had been so quick to report on the agricultural contamination, now ran headlines about HOA official arrested for environmental sabotage. While Trevor's arrest was a victory, I knew Karen would not back down easily. Using Sam's legal expertise and Emily's research skills, we began building a comprehensive case against the HOA's tactics. Rosa connected us with other landowners who had been pressured or harassed by Oak Ridge Estates, creating a coalition of affected parties. Many were reluctant to come forward at first, fearing retaliation, but the news of Trevor's arrest emboldened them. Reports of similar tactics emerged: falsified violations, excessive fines, harassment campaigns, all designed to force people to sell their land at below market rates. Sam helped me document every instance, building a pattern of predatory behavior. Emily's internet sleuthing unearthed the true smoking gun: emails between Karen and a resort development company called Lux Resorts International, discussing plans to consolidate the necessary acreage for a major resort and conference center. The emails explicitly mentioned using the HOA as a vehicle to acquire surrounding properties through regulatory pressure. Most damning was an email where Karen wrote about removing local obstacles by any means necessary, and referenced specific strategies to target my ranch in particular, calling it the key parcel for Phase 2 development. With the special county board meeting just days away, I needed to prepare my defense against Karen's attempt to remove me from office. Sam and I worked late into each night, organizing evidence and preparing presentation materials. We obtained official emails showing 2 county board members had received substantial donations from Oak Ridge Estates shortly before agreeing to hold the special meeting. Meanwhile, Emily orchestrated a social media campaign supporting me and exposing the HOA's tactics, which quickly gained traction in the community. Rosa mobilized her extensive network of local contacts, ensuring a strong showing of supporters at the meeting. The tide of public opinion was shifting, with many Oak Ridge residents themselves expressing concern about their HOA's aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. The day of the county board meeting arrived with tension hanging in the air like the electricity before a thunderstorm. The county meeting hall was packed beyond capacity, with people spilling out into the hallway. Karen and her allies had arrived early, securing front row seats and bringing several expensively dressed individuals I recognized as executives from Lux Resorts. They projected confidence, but I could see the nervousness in their frequent whispered consultations. Karen avoided making eye contact with me as I took my seat at the presentation table, arranging my documents methodically. Board Chairman Walker called the meeting to order, explaining that its purpose was to review the performance and conduct of my position as Land Commissioner. Karen was invited to speak first, and she approached the podium with practiced authority. "Members of the board, concerned citizens," she began, her voice steady and professional. "I come before you today with grave concerns about Commissioner Reynolds' abuse of his position for personal gain." For the next 15 minutes, she presented a carefully crafted narrative portraying me as an obstructionist, using my official power to block legitimate community development and maintain my unsightly and polluting farm operation at the expense of county progress. She accused me of having a conflict of interest, arguing that I couldn't objectively perform my duties while being involved in land disputes. Her presentation was slick, filled with misleading statistics about property values and economic development, peppered with phrases like "for the greater good" and "community vision." When she concluded, 2 board members who'd received HOA donations nodded appreciatively, while scattered applause came from the Lux Resorts representatives. When my turn came, I approached the podium calmly, thanking the board for the opportunity to address these concerns. Instead of immediately defending myself, I began by sharing my screen, which displayed a county map highlighting all the properties that Oak Ridge Estates HOA had acquired or attempted to acquire over the past 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is not random community development, but a systematic pattern of land acquisition. I methodically presented evidence of the HOA's tactics: the falsified surveys, unauthorized construction, environmental sabotage, and harassment campaigns against local landowners. I displayed the emails between Karen and Lux Resorts, revealing their plans to build a massive resort complex on land zoned for agricultural and residential use. This isn't about my farm or a fence dispute, I explained. This is about a private entity attempting to circumvent proper channels for land use changes, using intimidation and fraudulent practices to force out longtime residents for corporate profit. As murmurs spread through the audience, I continued presenting evidence, including testimony from other affected landowners who had been pressured by the HOA. I showed documentation of building code violations in the Oak Ridge development itself that had been mysteriously overlooked during inspections, and evidence that zoning regulations had been selectively enforced to target non-HOA properties. The final blow came when I played the security camera footage showing Trevor dumping contaminants into the irrigation channel. Mr. Nichols has already been arrested for these actions, but the evidence suggests he was not acting alone. I displayed Trevor's text messages with Karen, showing she had instructed him to create a situation that would demonstrate the environmental risks of my farm. The room erupted at this revelation. Karen jumped to her feet, shouting, "Those messages are private property. This is invasion of privacy." I remained calm, explaining, "These are communications sent on HOA-issued devices, obtained through a legal search warrant after Mr. Nichols' arrest for environmental crimes. There is no expectation of privacy for official communications related to criminal activity." Sheriff Jim, who was present at the meeting, stood to confirm the legality of the evidence. Karen's face had gone from flushed with anger to ashen as she realized the depth of the evidence against her. She attempted to leave the room, but Jim quietly approached her, speaking in a low voice that nevertheless carried in the suddenly silent chamber. "Ms. Westfield, I'll need you to remain for questioning regarding your role in the environmental sabotage incident." Board Chairman Walker, visibly disturbed by the evidence presented, called for a brief recess to confer with the other members. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. Not only would I retain my position as Land Commissioner, but the board would initiate a full investigation into the HOA's activities, with possible criminal charges for those involved in fraudulent practices. Furthermore, they suspended all pending permits for Oak Ridge Estates until the investigation was complete. Richard Stevens, looking deflated and frightened, distanced himself from Karen, volunteering to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. The Lux Resorts executives slipped out during the confusion, their dreams of a cheap land acquisition scheme in tatters. Karen was not arrested that day, but left the meeting escorted by Sheriff Jim for formal questioning. Over the following weeks, the full extent of the HOA's illegal activities came to light. Trevor, facing serious charges, quickly implicated Karen as the mastermind behind not just the environmental sabotage, but numerous other schemes. Karen eventually faced multiple charges including fraud, conspiracy, environmental crimes, and corruption. The HOA itself was placed under county supervision, with a special committee appointed to review all its activities and restructure its leadership. The fence that had started it all was removed within days of the meeting, and the damaged portion of my land was professionally restored at the HOA's expense. The lawsuit against me was withdrawn, and several former HOA board members publicly apologized for their roles in the harassment campaign. Most satisfying was watching Karen's carefully constructed facade of respectability crumble, as more residents came forward with stories of intimidation and abuse. The woman who had once ruled Oak Ridge Estates with an iron fist now faced both criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits from multiple victims of her schemes. 1 year later, Sunshine Ranch had transformed while still honoring its century-old heritage. The western edge that once sparked such conflict now hosted a community garden where Oak Ridge residents and farming families worked side by side. Weekend farmers markets on my property drew crowds from across the county. The HOA, under entirely new leadership, had embraced cooperation rather than confrontation, focusing on genuine improvements instead of aggressive expansion. Karen received a 5-year prison sentence for her crimes. Trevor, who cooperated with prosecutors, received probation and community service at the community garden, an ironic twist that seemed fitting. Richard lost his position and reputation, forced to leave the area after his role became public. Emily received a full scholarship to study environmental law, determined to follow in my footsteps, protecting agricultural land from development. Standing on the highest hill of my property one evening, looking out over the green fields and the harmonious boundary with Oak Ridge Estates, marked by a simple decorative stone wall built on the true property line, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes, you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just need to know where you stand, both literally and figuratively.